In 1880, the unmarried sisters, Catherine and Margaret Flanagan, managed a boarding house at 5 Skirving Street in Liverpool. The household consisted of the 2 sisters, Catherine's son John Flanagan, and 2 families renting rooms, one led by hod carrier Thomas Higgins, accompanied by his daughter Mary, and the other by Patrick Jennings, along with his daughter Margaret. Unexpectedly, John Flanagan, aged 22 and previously in good health, passed away in December of 1880. His demise didn't attract much attention, and Catherine received £71 from the burial society he was a part of, and he was laid to rest shortly thereafter. By 1882, a romantic relationship blossomed between Margaret Flanagan and Thomas Higgins, culminating in their marriage that October. Tragically, Thomas's daughter Mary, only 8 years old, fell ill and died a few months after the wedding. Once again, the burial society's funds were claimed upon the death, this time by Margaret Higgins. In January of 1883, Margaret Jennings, 19 years old, also passed away. Catherine was the one who received the burial payout this time. As rumors circulated in the neighborhood regarding the unusually high number of deaths within the house, Catherine, Margaret, and Higgins decided to relocate their household, first to 105 Latimer Street, and subsequently to 27 Ascot Street. In September of 1883, Higgins, then 45 years old, became another resident to fall mysteriously and seriously ill. His severe stomach pains prompted the involvement of Dr. Whitford, who diagnosed Higgins' illness as dysentery, possibly brought on by consumption of inexpensive whiskey, and he prescribed opium and castor oil as treatment. Unfortunately, Higgins succumbed after battling the illness for 2 days. A few days later, the same doctor was summoned again, this time to provide a death certificate, in which he attributed the cause of death to dysentery. While Dr. Whitford didn't question Higgins' apparent demise due to dysentery, his brother Patrick was taken aback by the sudden and unexpected nature of Thomas's surrender to illness, considering his prior robust health. Patrick's astonishment grew when he discovered that Thomas had been insured with 5 distinct burial societies, which resulted in a substantial profit of approximately £100 for his widow. Motivated by suspicion, Patrick decided to escalate the matter to the authorities. This led to the issuance of an order for a post-mortem examination of Higgins' body. Strikingly, the coroner arrived at the house to conduct the examination right in the midst of Higgins' wake, surprising the mourners. Upon learning that a comprehensive autopsy was scheduled, Catherine hastily fled the residence, evoking more suspicion. Upon completing the thorough autopsy of Higgins' remains, signs of arsenic poisoning emerged. His organs displayed traces of arsenic, indicating a gradual poisoning process spanning several days. Subsequently, Margaret was swiftly arrested, while Catherine, after evading police by changing locations between different boarding houses for almost a week, was apprehended in Wavertree. On October 16, 1883, both sisters faced formal charges for the murder of Thomas Higgins. As the method of Higgins' demise was linked to arsenic, authorities issued orders for the exhumation of deceased members of the household to gather further evidence. Upon examination, the bodies of John Flanagan, Mary Higgins, and Margaret Jennings displayed minimal decomposition, a characteristic consistent with arsenic poisoning. Traces of arsenic were identified in the remains of all 3 individuals. Initially, investigators presumed that the arsenic employed in the poisoning might have originated from rat poison. However, this theory was debunked when common additives typically found in rat poison failed to appear in the autopsy results. This prompted them to revise their hypothesis. It seemed improbable that the unschooled sisters could have accessed arsenic through the conventional avenue of visiting a chemist, more suited for doctors than unmarried women. Eventually, it came to light that prevalent flypaper of the era contained arsenic. Through the process of soaking the flypaper in water, a solution that closely resembled the one found in a bottle at Higgins' residence could be obtained. Upon her apprehension, Catherine asserted to her legal representative that the homicides were not singular events. She furnished a roster of either 6 or 7 additional deaths, which she attributed to a pattern of murders associated with burial society deception. During the 1884 trial, the prosecution linked Catherine and Margaret not only to the demise of Higgins, for which they were formally accused, but also to the 3 other fatalities within their household. Catherine's proposal to collaborate with the prosecution by offering evidence against fellow conspirators in exchange for leniency was dismissed. Following their conviction, the sisters were deemed guilty and received the death penalty, scheduled to be executed by hanging. On March 3, 1884, at Kirkdale Prison, a Roman Catholic priest provided spiritual support to the sisters as they faced their sentences. The execution was observed by an estimated crowd of 1,000 spectators. Mary Rogers was likely born around 1820, and she was believed to have been born in Lyme, Connecticut, although there are no existing birth records to confirm this. Tragically, when Mary was just 17, her father, James Rogers, lost his life in a devastating steamboat explosion. Raised as the sole child of her widowed mother, Mary grew into a strikingly beautiful young woman. Following this unfortunate event, Mary secured employment as a clerk in a tobacco shop owned by a man named John Anderson, situated in the vibrant city of New York. Anderson recognized Mary's physical allure and the influence it had on attracting numerous customers to the shop. He rewarded her with a generous wage, partly due to the additional clientele she brought in. Mary's charm was undeniable, as one patron confessed to spending an entire afternoon at the store, captivated by playful glances exchanged with her. Such was her allure that an admirer took to the pages of the New York Herald to publish a poem, praising her heaven-like smile and star-like eyes. Among her customers were esteemed literary figures such as James Fenimore Cooper, Washington Irving, and Fitzgreen Halleck, which added to her reputation and the store's appeal to New York's literary and social circles. On October 5, 1838, an alarming report in the newspaper, The Sun, stated that a young woman named Miss Mary Cecilia Rogers had vanished from her residence. Her distressed mother, Phoebe, claimed to have discovered a suicide note, which was subsequently examined by a local coroner. The analysis revealed what seemed to be a resolute and unwavering intention to take her own life. Curiously, the next day, the Times and Commercial Intelligence contradicted this narrative by asserting that the disappearance was nothing more than a ruse, and that Rogers had merely gone to visit a friend in Brooklyn. This sudden turn of events invited skepticism, especially considering that the New York Sun had previously published a controversial story known as the Great Moon Hoax in 1835. Some speculated that the apparent return of Mary Rogers might be the true hoax, pointing to her delay in resuming work at the tobacco shop as evidence. Rumors circulated, suggesting that the entire episode might have been a well-orchestrated publicity stunt, possibly concocted by the shop owner, Anderson. On July 25, 1841, Mary Rogers informed her fiancé, Daniel Payne, that she intended to visit her aunt and other relatives. However, 3 days later, on July 28th, a tragic discovery was made when the police found her lifeless body floating in the Hudson River near Hoboken, New Jersey. Known as the Beautiful Cigar Girl, her death became a gripping mystery that captured the attention of newspapers nationwide. Speculations surrounding the case suggested she may have been murdered or met with a tragic fate due to a botched procedure by the notorious abortionist Madame Bristol. The aftermath of her demise brought immense sorrow to her fiancé, Daniel Payne, who could not bear the pain and grief any longer. Distraught and overwhelmed, he succumbed to an overdose of laudanum during a night of heavy drinking, leaving a remorseful note found among his belongings near Sybil's Cave on October 7, 1841. The letter expressed his regret for a misspent life. The media extensively covered the story, shedding light on the inadequacy and corruption of the city's law enforcement, especially the watchman system. At the time, New York City's population of 320,000 relied on a rather archaic law enforcement force comprising of just one night watchman, 100 city marshals, 31 constables, and 51 police officers. One prevalent theory circulating in the public was that Mary Rogers had fallen victim to gang violence. Later, in November of 1842, Frederica Loss came forward and claimed that Rogers' death was the result of an unsuccessful abortion attempt. However, her account was met with skepticism by the police, and the case remains unsolved. Laura Ann Hunt entered the world in Holly Springs, Mississippi on June 22, 1837. Raised in a small family, she journeyed across the southern United States during her formative years, before her family finally established roots in New Orleans. At the age of 16, in 1853, Laura Ann Hunt wed her first husband, William H. Stone, a 36-year-old alcohol dealer hailing from New Orleans. Sadly, Stone passed away in 1854. Following his death, Laura embarked on her education journey at the Convent of Visitation with aspirations of becoming a teacher. However, within a year, she left her studies to marry Thomas Gratian. This union was short-lived, as Laura soon departed to assist her mother in managing a boarding house in San Francisco around 1856 or 1857. After relocating to Shasta, California, Laura encountered her third spouse, Sheriff William D. Fair. However, their union was short-lived, as they parted ways 3 years later, with Fair tragically taking his own life in 1861. This left Laura to fend for herself along with her daughter and mother. Initially attempting to establish a boarding house in Sacramento, they soon returned to San Francisco after facing difficulties. There, Laura briefly pursued a career as an actress. In 1870, she entered into a brief marriage with Jesse Snyder, which lasted only a few months. In September of 1862, spurred by the discovery of silver in the nearby hills, Fair launched the Tahoe House Hotel on South C Street in Virginia City, Nevada, boasting an impressive 37 rooms. In 1863, Fair became romantically involved with Alexander Parker Crittenden, a local lawyer who, unbeknownst to her, was already married. Despite claiming to be single and a widower, Crittenden concealed his marital status. Upon discovering the truth, Fair confronted Crittenden, who pledged to divorce his wife, Clara Churchill Jones. Their relationship endured for 7 years before its conclusion. In 1870, Clara Jones embarked on a lengthy train voyage to the East Coast, where she reunited with her 2 youngest children. Meanwhile, Fair discovered that Crittenden intended to rendezvous with his wife in Oakland, California, and was scheduled to board a ferry bound for San Francisco. On November 3, 1870, Fair boarded the same ferry and fatally shot Crittenden in the heart. In April of 1871, Fair stood trial for the first time, asserting that the shooting resulted from a bout of temporary insanity induced by excruciating menstrual pain. The prosecution depicted her as a woman of ill repute who had seduced Crittenden, urging the jury to consider their moral duty. During her incarceration, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton offered support to Fair. Despite her defense, the jury convicted Fair of murder, and she received a death sentence, scheduled to be executed on July 28, 1871. Fair's case received an appeal backed by suffragettes such as Emily Pitts Stevens, the California Women's Suffrage Association's founder. The conviction was overturned due to prejudice. Although the press initially supported the conviction, they expressed strong discontent with the acquittal, labeling it a shameful miscarriage of justice. In the subsequent trial, Fair was acquitted. She subsequently pursued work as a book agent in San Francisco. Fair passed away on October 19, 1919, at the age of 82 in San Francisco. She was laid to rest in an unmarked grave at Woodlawn Memorial Park Cemetery. Cordelia Botkin was from Polk County, Missouri, born in 1854. Eventually, her journey led her to California, where she tied the knot with Welcome Botkin. Their union blessed them with a son. In 1895, Botkin crossed paths with John Preston Dunning while he pedaled through San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Despite being 9 years her junior, Dunning, a respected reporter for the Associated Press, found himself captivated by her charm. Both were already married, yet Dunning couldn't resist her allure. With a prestigious career, including assignments in Samoa and Chile, Dunning had ascended to superintendent of the Associated Press Western Division Bureau in San Francisco. By 1896, Dunning's marriage to Mary Elizabeth Dunning hit rocky shores due to his extramarital affair. Mary retreated with their daughter to Dover, Delaware, seeking solace in the home of her father, former Congressman John B. Pennington. Meanwhile, Botkin became Dunning's devoted companion, despite her own strained marriage to a grain broker in Stockton, California, who still provided for her financially. However, Dunning's excessive drinking led to his dismissal from the Associated Press after embezzling $4,000 to cover gambling debts. Subsequent terminations from newspapers in Salt Lake City and San Francisco followed due to his persistent alcoholism, leading him to move in with Botkin at a local hotel. Their liaison endured for nearly 3 years until Dunning's reemployment in March of 1898 as the lead reporter for the impending Spanish-American War. Departing San Francisco, he bid farewell to a tearful Botkin, vowing not to return. Reconciliation with his wife preceded his departure for Cuba, where he played a crucial role in rescuing survivors of the Spanish battleships sunk during the Battle of Santiago de Cuba on July 2, 1898. Cordelia Botkin orchestrated a sinister plot by anonymously informing Elizabeth Dunning of her husband's infidelities. The scheme culminated on August 9, 1898, when Elizabeth innocently opened a box of candies addressed to her and her sister in Dover, Delaware. The box contained a seemingly innocent note, bearing the words, "With love to yourself and baby." Described as having an insatiable fondness for sweets, Elizabeth indulged in at least 3 pieces herself and shared the remainder with others on her father's porch. Tragically, within 2 days, both Elizabeth and her elder sister, 44-year-old Ida Harriet Dean, succumbed to arsenic poisoning, enduring agonizing deaths. Remarkably, 4 others who had partaken in the chocolates survived. Suspicion was raised when Elizabeth's father recognized the handwriting on the note, which matched the taunting letters he had safeguarded in a drawer. Police investigation traced the deadly confectionery back to a shop in San Francisco, ultimately leading authorities to Cordelia Botkin. Botkin faced trial under the jurisdiction of Judge Carroll Cook, with District Attorney Louis Francis Byington serving as prosecutor in the murder trial on April 30, 1904. Initially convicted of murder in December of 1898, Botkin pursued an appeal and was subsequently convicted once more during a retrial in 1904. As a result, she received a life sentence behind bars. Elizabeth was born in 1720 into a working-class family. She tied the knot with James Brownrigg, who was an apprentice plumber, when she was still in her teenage years. Despite giving birth to 16 children, only 3 managed to survive beyond infancy. In 1765, Elizabeth, along with her husband James and their son John, relocated to Flower de Luce Road, situated within London's Fetter Lane. James was making strides in his plumbing career, while Elizabeth had established herself as a reputable midwife. Her dedication to her profession led to her appointment as the overseer of women and children by St. Dunstan's Parish. Additionally, she was entrusted with the care of several female children from the London Foundling Hospital, who would serve as domestic servants under her guidance. Since its establishment by Thomas Coram in 1739, an ongoing debate had revolved around determining the appropriate role for the young charges under the care of the Foundling Hospital. In 1759, the Foundling Hospital began offering older children and young adolescents for vocational training as apprentices. Elizabeth Brownrigg was not the sole perpetrator of the mistreatment of unfortunate children used as forced labor, as accounts from the time indicate. Subsequent to the incidents detailed here, the Foundling Hospital implemented more rigorous oversight measures for the apprenticeship program. As a result, reported cases of apprentice abuse markedly declined, reflecting the institution's commitment to ensuring the well-being of the children entrusted to its care. Nevertheless, Elizabeth Brownrigg's inadequacy in the role of caring for her foundling domestic servants became evident, leading her down a path of severe physical abuse. Her cruel methods often involved stripping the young charges of their clothes and fastening them to wooden beams or pipes before subjecting them to harsh whippings with switches, bullwhip handles, and various other implements, even for the slightest infringements of her rules. Among her victims was Mary Jones, who managed to escape from Brownrigg's house and seek refuge at a London foundling hospital. Following a medical examination, the governors of the hospital cautioned James Brownrigg to control his wife's abusive behavior, yet they did not take any further action. Disregarding this warning, Elizabeth Brownrigg continued her brutal mistreatment, inflicting severe harm on two more domestic servants, Mary Mitchell and Mary Clifford. Like Jones, Mitchell attempted to flee the torment, but was compelled by John Brownrigg to return to Flower de Luce Road. Clifford, despite the previous concerns expressed by the governors, was entrusted to Brownrigg's care and subsequently endured even more extreme punishment. She was subjected to nakedness, confined to sleep on a mat within a coal hole, and when she resorted to scavenging cupboards for sustenance due to the meager rations of only bread and water, Elizabeth Brownrigg subjected her to prolonged beatings while chained to a roof beam in the kitchen. By June of 1767, Mitchell and Clifford were suffering from infected and untreated wounds, exacerbated by Brownrigg's unrelenting assaults that left them no opportunity to recover. As suspicions grew within the community, Brownrigg's neighbors urged the London Foundling Hospital to conduct a thorough investigation of the premises. This prompted the surrender of Mary Mitchell by Brownrigg. However, when Foundling Hospital Inspector Grundy demanded information about Clifford's whereabouts, James Brownrigg was apprehended. Elizabeth and John Brownrigg managed to evade capture. The public's sentiment turned strongly against the Brownriggs, ensuring their swift apprehension. In Wandsworth, a chandler identified the fugitives, leading to their trial at the Old Bailey in August of 1767. At this juncture, Mary Clifford had succumbed to the grievous effects of her infected wounds, leading to the accusation of murder against Elizabeth Brownrigg. During the trial, Mary Mitchell, a former employee, provided testimony against her former employer, along with accounts from Grundy and an apprentice of James Brownrigg. The presentation of medical evidence and autopsy findings unequivocally established that Elizabeth Brownrigg's repeated acts of violence and neglect towards Clifford's injuries had significantly contributed to the tragic demise of the 14-year-old. As a result, Elizabeth Brownrigg received a sentence of execution by hanging at Tyburn, followed by the public dissection of her body. While awaiting her impending fate, Elizabeth Brownrigg exhibited remorse and fervently prayed for salvation. However, her journey to the execution site was met with the condemnation of the crowd, who vented their abhorrence for her heinous crime through spitting and verbal outbursts. On the path leading to her place of execution, the populace expressed their repugnance for her deeds in ways that, though inappropriate for the occasion, underscored their disbelief that such a monstrous individual could exist. They offered prayers, not for her redemption, but rather for her condemnation. They held no doubt that the devil would claim her, and their wish was for her to descend into the depths of hell. In 1915, in New York City, a 20-year-old May Ruth Brown encountered Albert Edward Schneider, then a 33-year-old artist. Their personalities diverged. Ruth, known familiarly as Tommy to close friends, exuded vivacity, while Schneider tended towards reserve, earning him the label of a homebody. Despite these disparities, the couple married and settled in a modest house in Queens. In due time, in 1918, Ruth bore their sole offspring, a daughter named Lorraine. Albert's occupation as an art editor for the Motor Boating magazine provided them a steady income of $100 per week. By 1925, Ruth embarked on an affair with Henry Judd Gray, a married corset salesman from the New Jersey suburbs. This liaison catalyzed Ruth's machinations for her husband's demise, enlisting Gray's reluctant aid. Accounts diverge on the origins of Ruth's dislike towards Albert. Some attribute it to his reverence for his deceased fiancé, Jessie Gishyard, evidenced by a prominently displayed portrait and a boat named in her honor, despite her decade-long passing. Conversely, others pointed to Albert's purported emotional and physical abuse, including resentment towards Ruth for bearing a daughter instead of a son, exacting standards for domestic upkeep, and instances of physical violence against Ruth and Lorraine when these expectations weren't met. Ruth's plan commenced with persuading Albert to procure insurance, orchestrating with an insurance agent, later dismissed and incarcerated for forgery, to secure a $48,000 life insurance policy with enhanced benefits in the event of a violent death. Gray attested to Ruth's multiple unsuccessful attempts on Albert's life, numbering at least 7. On March 20th, 1927, the fatal plot unfolded as the couple garroted Albert with a picture wire, administered chloroform-soaked rags to his nostrils, and bludgeoned him with a sash weight, staging the scene as a burglary. Detectives scrutinizing the aftermath noted scant evidence of forced entry, casting doubt on Ruth's narrative of a terrified spouse witnessing her husband's demise. Upon investigation, authorities uncovered the alleged items Ruth reported missing were secretly stowed within the confines of their home. A pivotal moment arose when a detective stumbled upon a paper bearing the initials JG, a keepsake from Albert's past liaison with Gisheard. Upon interrogation, Ruth, visibly flustered, hastily redirected suspicion towards Gray, whose initials coincidentally mirrored those in the paper. This impromptu association of Gray with the crime marked the first mention of his involvement, sparking immediate suspicion among law enforcement. Gray's whereabouts were traced to Syracuse, New York, where he asserted that he had remained throughout the night in question. However, further scrutiny revealed that a confidant of Gray's had orchestrated arrangements at a local hotel to bolster his alibi. In contrast to Ruth's unwillingness to talk, Gray proved more forthcoming regarding his actions. Subsequently apprehended, he was extradited to Queens, where he faced charges alongside Ruth. Ruth and Gray each pointed accusatory fingers at the other, vehemently asserting their innocence while laying blame for Albert's demise squarely at the feet of their co-conspirator. Nevertheless, both were found guilty and met with the grim fate of a death sentence. Ruth found herself incarcerated at Sing Sing Penitentiary in Ossining, New York. On January 12, 1928, she made history as the first woman to face the electric chair at Sing Sing since Martha Place in 1899, marking the third instance of a woman being executed by the state of New York. Ruth met her fate in the electric chair 10 minutes before her former love, Judd Gray. Following their deaths, Ruth was laid to rest in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, while Gray found his final resting place in Rosedale Cemetery in Montclair, New Jersey. Chester Gillette was born in Jefferson County, Montana, where Franklin Gillette and Louisa Maria Rice welcomed him into the world. Their union occurred on October 21, 1883, shortly after their son's birth. Despite their initial financial comfort, his parents, deeply devoted to their faith, relinquished their material possessions to join the Salvation Army. This decision led the family on a journey across the west coast of the United States. As a result, Gillette experienced his formative years in Spokane, Washington, and later resided in Hawaii during his teenage years. Despite his upbringing, Gillette didn't embrace the religious teachings. His education was facilitated by a wealthy uncle, who supported his attendance at the Oberlin College's preparatory school, but Gillette departed after 2 years in 1903. Subsequently, he engaged in various odd jobs until 1905, when he secured a position at his uncle's skirt factory in Cortland, New York. While working at the factory, Gillette crossed paths with Grace Brown, a fellow employee. Their professional relationship evolved into a romantic one, with Brown anticipating marriage. In the spring of 1906, Brown disclosed her pregnancy to Gillette, intensifying her efforts to secure a marital commitment from him. She frequently wrote pleading letters to Gillette, urging him to wed her. Briefly, Brown returned to her parents' residence, but later came back to Cortland upon learning of Gillette's involvement with another woman. One well-known narrative involved Miss Harriet Benedict, a prosperous acquaintance of Gillette's, whom newspapers speculated as the potential other woman in the scenario. Harriet vehemently refuted these claims, publicly stating, "I have never been engaged to Chester E. Gillette. Our interaction was brief, and no discussion of engagement ever took place between us." Throughout the spring and summer of 1906, observers noted a growing tension between Gillette and Brown, marked by his escalating voice and her tears, both at the factory and in their personal spaces. Brown persistently sought clarity from Gillette, while he evaded commitment with vague assurances about their future and the possibility of a trip together. Eventually, Gillette arranged a journey to the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. They spent the night in Utica before proceeding to Tupper Lake in Franklin County, where rain thwarted their plans for a lakeside outing. As a result, they redirected to Big Moose Lake in Herkimer County. At the Glenmore Hotel by the lakeside, Gillette checked in under a false name, though one that coincidentally matched his initials on the suitcase he carried, along with a tennis racket. Brown, at this juncture, might have anticipated an elopement ceremony of some sort. On July 11th, Gillette and Brown embarked on a rowboat excursion on Big Moose Lake, during which Gillette viciously attacked her with his tennis racket and left her to drown in the water. Initially, authorities presumed both had drowned when they discovered an overturned boat and Gillette's hat adrift on the lake. Meanwhile, Gillette, carrying a suitcase, trekked through the woods to Fulton Chain Lakes, where he registered at the Arrowhead Hotel using his real identity. Witnesses later testified that Gillette appeared composed and unruffled, exhibiting no signs of distress. Brown's lifeless body was recovered from the lake the following day. A post-mortem examination revealed severe head injuries, prompting authorities to shift their investigation from accidental drowning to homicide. Gillette's attempt to conceal his crime was poorly executed, leading to his swift apprehension in nearby Inlet, New York. Grace Brown was laid to rest in Valley View Cemetery, in her hometown of South Oslick, New York. The trial unfolded in Herkimer County, capturing widespread national attention. Despite his uncle's refusal to fund his defense, Gillette was provided court-appointed attorneys who adamantly asserted his innocence, suggesting that Brown had taken her own life and Gillette was a mere bystander. However, Gillette's credibility was compromised by his inconsistent accounts, initially denying his presence at the scene, then attributing Brown's demise to an accidental drowning, and later alleging suicide. He struggled to justify Brown's injuries, the presence of his suitcase on the ill-fated boat trip, and its inexplicable dryness despite the boat capsizing. Ultimately, the jury found Gillette guilty of murder. The verdict was affirmed by a New York State appeals court, and Governor Charles Evan Hughes declined to intervene with clemency or reprieve. On March 30th, 1908, Chester Gillette met his fate in the electric chair at Auburn Prison in Auburn, New York. His final resting place is Soul Cemetery in Sennett, New York. Pearl Bryan entered the world as the daughter of Alexander S. Bryan and Susan Jane Bryan. Her father, a highly regarded farmer in the community, provided a stable upbringing for her. After completing her education at Greencastle High School, Pearl embarked on her journey as a Sunday school teacher. However, tragedy struck when she left her hometown of Greencastle on January 28, 1896, with the intention of visiting a friend in Indianapolis. On February 1, 1896, a gruesome discovery was made just behind what is now the YMCA in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. The body of Pearl Bryan was found without a head by a young farmhand named Johnny Hewling, who was only 17 years old at the time. The coroner examination revealed that Pearl had suffered multiple wounds on her back and hands, and shockingly, she had been decapitated while still alive. Adding to the tragedy, it was discovered that Pearl was 5 months pregnant when she met her untimely demise. Identification of her body was made possible by the tag on her custom-made shoes from Greencastle, Indiana. Pearl Bryan's headless remains were laid to rest in the family plot at Forest Hill Cemetery in Greencastle. The investigation into her murder led to the arrest of Scott Jackson, a dental student at the Ohio College of Dental Surgery, who was soon implicated in the crime along with his roommate Alonzo M. Walling, also a student at the college. During the trial, it was revealed that Jackson and Bryan had been involved in a secret romance for several months prior to her death. Allegedly, on January 31, 1896, Jackson and Walling drugged Pearl with cocaine at a saloon in Cincinnati and later took her life that same night. Analysis of her stomach confirmed the presence of cocaine at the time of her death. The whereabouts of Pearl's head remain a mystery, as Jackson and Walling provided conflicting answers, claiming it was at the bottom of the Ohio River or on a sandbar in Dayton, Kentucky. Search efforts in those locations proved fruitless. In 1937, former Detective Cal Krim of the Cincinnati Police Department theorized that the two murderers had incinerated Pearl's head in a furnace at their dental college. To this day, her head has never been recovered. Jackson's trial commenced on April 21, 1896, and concluded on May 14th of that same year. Walling's trial followed on May 26th and ended on June 18th. Both were found guilty of first-degree murder and were executed by hanging on the morning of March 20th, 1897, behind the Newport Campbell County Courthouse in Newport, Kentucky. Disturbingly, reports indicate that Jackson and Walling survived the initial drop meant to break their necks and were instead strangled to death several minutes later. They became the last individuals to be hanged in Newport, and the gallows behind the courthouse were subsequently demolished. Martha Place, originally Martha Mattie Garretson, entered the world on September 18, 1849, in Readington Township, New Jersey. Her parents were Ellen and Isaac Garretson. At the age of 23, Martha suffered a head injury from a sleigh accident, which her brother believed affected her mental stability permanently. Prior to her move to New York, Martha resided in New Jersey, pursuing a career as a dressmaker. She tied the knot with Wesley Savacool and bore a son, Ross Savacool. However, Wesley departed when Ross was just 3 years old, leaving Martha in dire straits. As a result, she entrusted Ross to the care of the Aschenbach family of Newark, who had recently lost their own son, renaming him William. In 1893, Martha commenced employment as a housekeeper for William W. Place, residing at 598 Hancock Street in Brooklyn. Later that year, Martha and William tied the knot. Place had a daughter named Ida from a previous marriage, and William married Martha partly to assist in raising Ida. Nonetheless, rumors circulated that Martha harbored jealousy towards Ida, with William even contacting the police on at least one occasion due to Martha's threats against Ida's life. On the evening of February 7, 1898, William Place returned to his residence in Brooklyn, New York, only to be assaulted by Martha, who wielded an axe. William managed to escape and sought assistance. Upon police arrival, Martha Place was found in a critical state, lying on the floor with garments covering her head, while gas seeped from the burners into the room. Upstairs, they discovered the lifeless body of 17-year-old Ida Place on a bed, blood oozing from her mouth. William, an amateur photographer, utilized acid in his work, and the perpetrator had splashed this acid into Ida's eyes. Subsequent evidence suggested Ida Place succumbed to asphyxiation. Martha Place was then admitted to the hospital and subsequently taken into custody. While awaiting trial, Place adamantly asserted her innocence. According to a contemporary newspaper account, she was depicted as follows. She stands rather tall and lean, bearing a pale, angular countenance. Her nose is elongated and pointed, her chin prominent and sharp, her lips thin, and her forehead recedes. There's a quality about her visage that evokes the image of a rat, and her bright yet unchanging eyes somehow accentuate this perception. Following the trial, Martha Place was convicted of the murder of her stepdaughter, Ida, and received a death sentence. Her husband played a pivotal role as a key witness against her. When the governor of New York, Theodore Roosevelt, was petitioned to commute Place's death sentence, he declined. As no woman had been electrocuted in the electric chair before, those tasked with carrying out the sentence devised a novel method to attach to the electrodes. They slit her dress and affixed the electrodes to her ankle. Edwin F. Davis served as the executioner, and according to eyewitness reports, Martha Place perished instantly. Following her execution, Martha Place was interred in the family cemetery plot in East Millstone, New Jersey, without any religious ceremonies. Though Martha Place was the first woman to meet her end in the electric chair, she was not the first to be sentenced to such fate. Prior instances include Lizzie Halliday, a serial killer whose 1894 conviction was commuted, and Maria Barbella, sentenced in 1895 and acquitted the following year. Bridget Cleary, originally known as Bridget Boland, was born on February 19, 1869, in County Tipperary, Ireland. On August 6, 1887, she married Michael Cleary at the Roman Catholic Church in Drangan. Their first encounter took place earlier that same month in Clonmel, where Michael worked as a cooper and Bridget served as a dressmaker's apprentice. Although they were married for 8 years, they did not have any children at the time of Bridget's passing. Following their marriage, Bridget returned to her hometown of Ballavladlia to live with her parents, while Michael continued to work as a cooper in Clonmel. During this period of living separately, Bridget became more independent. She started her own flock of chickens and sold eggs to her neighbors. It was quite unusual for that time and place for a woman to have a profession, but Bridget was a skilled dressmaker and milliner. She even acquired a state-of-the-art Singer sewing machine. After Bridget's mother passed away, the Clearys took on the responsibility of caring for Bridget's elderly father, Patrick Boland. Having him live with them allowed them to secure a house reserved for laborers. Although neither Bridget nor Michael were entitled to this cottage, Patrick's previous occupation as a laborer made it possible for them to obtain the best house in the village. However, due to its location on the site of a rumored fairy ring fort, there was little interest from others in the house. In March of 1895, Bridget was reported missing under concerning circumstances. She had been unwell for a few days, supposedly diagnosed with bronchitis. As her condition worsened, a physician visited her home on March 13, 1895, followed by a priest who administered the last rites due to her grave condition. Over the next 2 days, Bridget received care from friends and family who resorted to various home remedies. However, a troubling incident occurred that foreshadowed her tragic fate. Both her father and her husband accused Bridget of being a fairy who had taken her place, and they performed a ritual where they threw urine on her and carried her to the fireplace in an attempt to expel the supposed fairy presence. By March 16th, rumors began to spread about Bridget's disappearance, prompting local police to initiate a search. Michael, her husband, claimed that his wife had been abducted by fairies and seemed to be keeping a vigil. Witness testimonies were gathered in the following week, leading to the charge of 9 people, including Michael, in connection with Bridget's disappearance. On March 22nd, Bridget's charred body was discovered in a shallow grave, and a coroner's inquest the next day concluded that her cause of death was burning. The legal proceedings took place from April 1st to April 6, 1895. Initially, 10 individuals were charged, but 1 was discharged, leaving 9 defendants to face trial. On July 3rd, the court session began, and the grand jury indicted 5 of the defendants, namely Michael Cleary, Patrick Boland, Mary Kennedy, James Kennedy, and Patrick Kennedy for murder. All 9 defendants faced charges of wounding. The case proceeded to trial. Evidence presented during the trial revealed that on March 15th, Michael called upon Father Bryan to visit their home. Bryan found Bridget alive, but in a state of agitation. Michael informed the priest that he had not been administering the prescribed medicine to his wife, as he had no faith in it. According to Ryan's account, Michael expressed that alternative remedies might be more effective than conventional medicine. Bridget received communion from the priest, and he departed. Later that night, neighbors and relatives returned to the Cleary household, leading to an argument infused with fairy folklore. At some point, Bridget told Michael that the only person who had been taken by fairies was his own mother. In response, Michael attempted to force-feed Bridget, violently throwing her to the ground in front of the fireplace and beating her with a burning piece of wood. Bridget's clothing caught fire, and Michael proceeded to douse her with lamp oil. The witnesses were uncertain whether Bridget was already deceased at this point. Michael prevented others from approaching her burning body, insisting that she was a changeling who had been replaced by the fairies. He believed he could retrieve his real wife from their clutches. During the trial, the jury was taken to the storage building where Bridget's body was being held for burial, allowing them to witness the condition of her body and the extent of her injuries. They personally verified her identity by viewing her face. The jury's observations in the outbuilding served as harrowing evidence of the immense suffering Bridget had endured before her death. As the trial concluded, charges against 1 co-defendant, William Ahern, were dropped. 3 others, namely John Dunn, Michael Kennedy, and William Kennedy were convicted of wounding. Patrick Kennedy received a 5-year sentence of penal servitude. Michael Kennedy was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor. James Kennedy was sentenced to 8 months of hard labor. William Kennedy was also sentenced to 8 months of hard labor, and Mary Kennedy was released due to her advanced age and frailty. Patrick Boland received a 6-month sentence of hard labor, while John Dunn was sentenced to 3 years of penal servitude. Michael Cleary was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years of penal servitude, serving 15 years in prison. He was released from Maryborough Prison on April 28, 1910, and subsequently moved to Liverpool, England. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button to join our community. We upload every Monday and Thursday at 4 p.m. For more content like this, be sure to check out our other videos on the channel. You can also follow us on our other social media platforms for uploads and updates. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.